Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Neutral Boxing Chat in association with Checkhook Boxing. I'm your host, Aaron McLachlan, and with me today is one of the finest boxing historians in the world, Bad Left Hook writer and Checkhook Boxing poster, Kyle McLachlan, who is of no relation. How you doing, Kyle?
Don't lie, man. We're brothers from another mother, and you know that. We just pronounce our names slightly differently, and our accents are completely skew with. But yeah, I'm great, mate, and appreciate the introduction. And guarantee a lot of people have switched off straight away after hearing that I'm on.
Don't be too hard on yourself, mate. Basically, I want to something that's really been catching my mind over the past 6 months to a year is the way that all of the long reigning champions have sort of dropped off and new names have been emerging. A term that I really like to discuss is the changing of the guard. Of course, we've seen Pacquiao just retire recently. We saw Mayweather retire a little while ago. Hopkins is on his way out. Jones is on his way out. All of these guys who would really be considered all-time greats in the sense of things. So, with you and the vast knowledge that you have of the historical aspect of the sport, I want to try and get some knowledge out of you as to who you think future all-time greats could potentially be.
Yeah, sounds great to me, mate. It sounds great to me. I mean, as you know from, I'm chatting to you for probably the best part of half a decade or so now, and I find it probably the most interesting topic with boxing because we watch boxing, I suppose, for great fights and to see engaging personalities, but also to see fighters sort of prove themselves. And I've said the main criticism from most boxing fans, we do tend to be a kind of cynical, jaded bunch with our own eras, and those that have grown up through other times of boxing, even possibly even more so. Obviously, you do get some exceptions of some guys that just only see the good in things, but a lot of us are quite jaded, and a lot of us have the issue. Even those that aren't historians, and there are some guys out there who've got no interest in the history of boxing and looking at old fights that say, well, he's either he's not taking the right fights, or it'd be great to see him do it like this guy. Even if their point of reference is, Ray Leonard or Marvin Hagler, or one of the more famous so-called old school legends or all-time greats. Even those more recent counterpoints to the modern guys seem so much more proven and easier to get a gauge on in terms of their quality. In comparison, not just to their peers, but to the historical figures that have preceded them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, you take a look at some of the more famous lists that have been posted out there, like Matt McGrain's is always quite a good reference point, I think. Just to sort of take a look at the guys who maybe squeeze into the lower end of the top 100 list, the James Toney, Joe Kozagi type. And I think that
Jung Koo Chang as well. That was me. I got Chang in there.
Yeah.
There's probably a fighter we might talk about today who's around the same sort of weight at Chang, or has been, and Chang is a pretty good gauge of how damn good you've got to be to even get near like the top 90 to 100 spots. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So a while back, I actually posed this question to the forum, and I'd say probably 90% of people replied just saying Roman Gonzalez. That if anyone today, if you ignore, of course, the current crop, the guys who haven't quite retired, like Roy Jones, for whatever reason, still fighting. Hopkins hasn't really officially retired. But of the current crop, pretty much everyone said either Roman Gonzalez or Andre Ward. I would say that of the two of them, Gonzalez probably has more chance just for the quality that he really has around him.
Yeah, certainly. The issue being, let's just say if you don't mind, if we start off talking about it in a kind of a top 100 kind of scenario. Let's say that each division, as we know it today, as a top 10, obviously some not as prestigious as others for historical reasons. There just haven't been, as many fights or as many fighters populating those divisions. So, for example, if we look at super middleweight, to go back to what you said about Andre Ward and Roy Jones and people like Calzaghe, James Toney as well, who's barely at light heavyweight, he did nothing. At middleweight, he was probably absolutely sublime, but struggling with the weight a bit. At super middleweight, done some good work, but didn't really. He kind of his best wins are over light heavyweights. He dragged down, and then obviously in his biggest fight of the weight, he completely ballsed it up. I mean, you're not going to rate any of those guys in the top 100 just based on their work at super middleweight, but they're definitely. I mean, those four guys there, Calzaghe, Jones, Ward and Tony, whichever way you slice it, are likely the top four super middleweights of all time. Let's just say there's a top 10 for each of those weight classes, even strawweight. What's that, 18 weight classes?
Yeah.
Well, that's 180 fighters right there. And then if you consider that there's probably guys, let's say a division like lightweight or welterweight, which is absolutely heaving with fighters, there's probably guys that you would rank, let's give you an arbitrary figure, 18th at welterweight that are probably more accomplished than Calzaghe. You know, so you can't make a list out of the top 10 of each division. I would say that even nowadays, it's still possible for guys to get into the top 10 of their division. That's not. I mean, as Andre Ward, as I say, super middleweight's a fairly shallow division historically. It's always been a good weight. It's a perfect weight because obviously in the past, middleweight to light heavyweight, there was so much leeway in that 15 pounds. The super middleweight's a great division. You see guys like Dick Tiger, and I did warn you I'd go off on a tangent beforehand, but just to give guys an example at home. Dick Tiger's a guy who's a beast at middleweight during same day weigh-ins. He squeezes into the weight. He wins the middleweight title. He's way too small for light heavyweight, really. But he's perfect for super middleweight if there's a super middleweight at that time. Nowadays, the guys at super middleweight would be as big as or bigger than the light heavyweights he was facing at the time, you know. But for Dick Tiger to win the middleweight title and the light heavyweight title, which he did go on to do, is infinitely more impressive to me. And I guess most sort of open-minded as even fans, not even historians, which is quite a pretentious term anyway, I find. You know, I am a historian myself, but I find it quite pretentious. It kind of says, well, it's a kind of puts you on a pedestal compared to other people that just like the sport and do their research. But to me, that's way more impressive than, say, Adrian Broner winning how many other titles and how many weight classes, or Robert Guerrero. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Someone like Gonzalez, again, he's in a predicament. He's a guy who, in my opinion, and people will disagree, but I don't care because flyweight and I mean featherweight and below is kind of my specialty. Even though I'm pretty well versed on most boxing history and most weight classes from sort of the gloved era onwards. Obviously, there are gaps in my knowledge. There's gaps in everyone's knowledge, but featherweight and down, mainly because I've done a lot of research to it, and not a lot of people do. That's probably my specialty, along with like fighters from the Far East. And flyweight is just a ridiculously packed weight class. The thing is, Gonzalez isn't really doing anything differently to the guys in the past. On a pound for pound perspective, if you take it all into account, so you say, oh well, you know, Gonzalez might not be a top 10 flyweight, but he's a top 10, he's a top 5 strawweight, a top 5 light flyweight, and a top 15 flyweight. Is that enough to get him in the top 100?
Absolutely.
That's the case you would try and make for him. I mean, he reckons he's only going to have one more fight at flyweight. Well, if that one more fight is Estrada, then he could put himself in the top 10, in the top 10 at flyweight, because that's a nice small but good body of work. But you've got to remember as well, back in the day there wasn't a strawweight and a light flyweight, so you've got to look at guys. Gonzalez, you might rank him on those three things and the titles that he's amassed in those divisions. But then you look at someone like, let me think of an example. Well, I'll tell you what, Jimmy Wilde's a good example, but even better one. Jimmy Wilde's like a famous example. I'd prefer to go slightly off the beaten track. The late 20s and into the 30s, you had probably the most stacked lighter weight division of all time, with guys like Newsboy Brown and Frankie Gennaro and Midget Wolgast, and those are just three of the top guys that absolutely stacked. And these guys fought midgets at flyweight, and they had no qualms about facing bantamweights, even slightly over the bantamweight limit, what we would now see as super bantamweight, and basically was then featherweight. You know, guys weighing 121, 122, 123 pounds. These guys did it all. That, for me, if you take the titles out of the equation, and you shouldn't with Gonzalez, because really he has been the number one in 3 weight classes. That is impressive.
Yeah.
But for me, it's not so much the weight class; it's the amount of weight travelled. For me personally, there's not down in those weights, it's not really hard to make a jump from straw weight to light flyweight, especially when you
Absolutely, yeah.
take in. And again, Aaron, you've got to take into context the fact that he's got 24-hour weigh-ins. We know for a fact that Gonzalez weighs what as a featherweight in the ring nowadays.
Yeah, I believe he's usually about 124 to 126 in the ring.
Exactly. So, and guys, but everyone's cut weight over time. People always have, but you can't tell me that Miguel Canto is the best flyweight of the 70s, and in my eyes, a top 5 flyweight of all time. Absolutely brilliant fighter. There's a guy there who's weighing in on the day at 108, 109 pounds. That's a small guy. He's a small guy. Simple fact. Would Gonzalez have won titles at strawweight, light flyweight, and flyweight in Canto's day if those divisions were even available? If he had to weigh in the day, you might have had Gonzalez versus natural featherweight size guys.
You know,
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I completely understand. I'm very interested in how you brought that up. Obviously, when Gonzalez fought last week, a lot of people started to have a discussion. You were involved in it as well, just on Twitter, and comparing Gonzalez to Ricardo Lopez. Lopez is a guy who I think it kind of damages him, the fact that he wasn't willing to move through those weight classes with such small jumps. If he was willing to do that, who knows how great his career could have been.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, the thing with Lopez is there was a point when I first got into online discussion about boxing that Lopez was, even with me, was probably, I mean, people had him in the top 10, top 20 of all time, because obviously you watch him on film, you don't know very much about his opponents, and you assume that you just don't know anything about his opponents, but they're probably really good. And the fact of the matter is that there's hardly any small men that small in the developed world. Then what percentage of them are boxing, and then what percentage of those guys are boxing at a decent level? Add 24-hour weigh-ins to it, and you just dilute those weights massively. Now, again, Lopez is a good example here, because Lopez is, for me, he's the greatest strawweight of all time. And if you take that division out and maybe you put them as one compressed weight division, and you include guys like Junku Chang, Meng Wo Yu, Gonzalez even, Chiquita Gonzalez, Michael Carbajal, Lopez has still got to be top 5. And, you know, he's that good. And he did move up to light flyweight. And the big discussion with Lopez is, oh, well, he wanted to fight Carbajal and Gonzalez and they didn't want to fight him. Well, that's fair enough. Now, in my own criteria, I don't give guys credit for things they didn't do because it wasn't their fault. I only give guys credit for what they did do. Because to give Lopez a free pass because it wasn't his fault those fights didn't get made would be punishing guys who didn't get that free pass and had to take on the hardest fights, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I feel
so, you know, yeah. I can sort of be prejudiced against Lopez, but I can, in order, if I elevate him too much, I'm being prejudiced to other guys. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely get you. Yeah, it's actually also a very interesting point that how you can't give someone credit for being avoided. You know, I was going to go into this in a little bit, but I'll just segue into it sort of just now with Golovkin. Obviously, we can see that he's a fantastic fighter. You know, he had a great amateur career. He's deadly at what he does, and I don't think that you can really argue that there's anyone at 160 who would beat him just now. But even though he's not getting those fights, you can't really give him the credit because of that. So if he's unable to get those fights, even though we know he could win, it's going to be really difficult to really rank him as one of the best middleweights that he's trying to be.
Definitely, and again, middleweight. If I use welterweight as an example earlier, and absolutely stacked. Still there?
Yep,
still there, mate? Yeah, sorry, mate. I was just saying middleweight, just like flyweight and welterweight discussion and examples used earlier, is historically a stacked division. I don't know about you, Aaron. I'd be interested in your thoughts, but this so-called record breaking and that Golovkin's broken or going to break Carlos Monzon's record as middleweight title defenses. Do you count any of those defenses?
Well, no, because I mean, it's all pretty to hear. You know, it's nice to hear he's won so many. He's had so many title defenses. He won belts in so many weight classes. You know, but it really, at the end of the day, that's all a very materialistic way to look at the sport. And I think that resume is everything, and you need to just look at the guys who are beat, look at the guys who they fought, where they were in their career. there is no comparing the resume of Golovkin to Carlos Monzon or Marvin Hagler or any of these great middleweight champions of the past.
And the funny thing is, I get a lot of stick for this for guys online. And I'll say it again, look, we should have said it at the beginning. If anyone wants to speak to me, I'm on Twitter. I'm at Ferocious Flea. Find me on Check Up Boxing. You can stalk me on Bad Left Duck if you want to come into my comment sections. But I've fallen out of a lot of people before because I don't rate Carlos Monzon that highly. He's no doubt a top 5 middleweight of all time. People give him way too many free passes for opposition, and he faced pretty much all the best available guys going. I mean, he faced some past prime guys. The very best middleweight he ever faced was 2 years removed from his prime and mangled his hands in a car crash. And yet so many historians don't like to acknowledge these facts, you know what I mean? So if I can't give Monzon a free pass, a guy who I think is one of the greatest middleweights of all time, I can't give Golovkin a free pass, even though he's probably my current active favourite fighter. I mean, as you know, Aaron, I haven't finished it. Anyone who reads Bad Left Hook and knows me hates me because I start a series and never finish them because I'm quite meticulous. I'm a bit of a perfectionist. But Golovkin's such an interesting character to me. I traced the whole history of Kazakh boxing. And
fantastic piece of work, by the way, from what I read. I think I read the first few pieces of that. You need to get finishing with that, mate.
I do need to finish it. And the thing is, I have it all mapped out in my head. I know how it ends, and it's just like, you know, like you, man. You know, if I was a full-time boxing writer, I could finish it in a week. But I have a life, and I have a missus, and I have work and stuff. And it's just, I have to find time to be asked onto these 2-bit podcasts all the time. Oh, sorry, man. Sorry, you know what I mean? But yeah, you know, Golovkin is fucking brilliant. And there's no doubt in my mind that if the middleweight championship was up for grabs, I'd almost retroactively give him more credit, if that makes sense. Let's say he fights Canelo next and beats him. I'd kind of go, well, yeah, he has been the best middleweight for the past couple of years, just as people knew Hagler was the best middleweight after he had the draw against Antifermo, and then he had to wait until he could get Minter in London, in England, to get the title. People were saying the same thing about Hagler. This is not an exclusive problem to Golovkin about missing the big fights. Hagler, he had the Hearns fight on the table. Tommy Hearns got injured. What was it, 2 years before he actually got that fight? This is not a modern problem or a problem that's exclusive to Golovkin about being ducked or so-called avoided or being too much risk for not enough reward. This is a problem which many middleweights have had in the past, and the difference being those guys eventually did reach the top of the mountain. Well, obviously I'm going to give Golovkin more credit. A lot of people out there call for Golovkin to seek challenges higher up in weight. Now he could probably take a fight at super middleweight and smash Ramirez, whoever it is who's got the belt up there. I mean, I thought Abraham would have been a good fight for him, just as a stopgap. The title wouldn't have meant nothing to me, but you know, it would have given some people would have shut up about him needing to move up, I suppose. I mean, Andre Ward's the big one. For me, I like division. I like divisional dominance, and I like the fact that Golovkin seems to like it as well. He wants those bouts, much like Lomachenko did at featherweight until he recently moved because he knows he isn't going to get those shots. These guys, they want to be seen as the main man in their division, and I really appreciate that. And I think Golovkin, with the body of work that he's already got, if he moves up and maybe takes a couple of fights at super middleweight, and let's say he wins them all, he's basically got a small body of work at one weight, which is probably quite good, and then a long body of weight at another body of work at another weight, which never really caught fire. And I think when you have a resume, or as English fans like to say, a ring record like that, you kind of don't really throw yourself into the conversation as being, you know, one of the all-time greats. I mean, if you use Calzaghe as an example, a long career at super middleweight with a couple of really good standout wins, and then 2 fights at light heavyweight. No one's putting him in their top 100 light heavyweights of all time.
Of course not, yeah. And that's kind of how for fighters today, if they want to try and be considered great, it's kind of, they face the option of, do I try and focus on divisional dominance, or do I move up in the weight classes and try and prove myself out with my comfort zone? You know, Lomachenko, as you mentioned, he wanted to stay at 126 and really build a resume there, get all the belts, and he could have cleaned up there, and it's such a stacked division that who knows how well he could have been rated there. But those fights just weren't happening, so he had to move up. Golovkin still sticking at 160, trying to get these big fights, and to be honest, I think partly he wants a big payday against Canelo, and fair enough to him, he deserves it. But you got to question how much more does he have to do? And are those fights even available for him to start to be considered in the conversation of a top 15, top 10 middleweight of all time?
Hey, I'll tell you what, man. Another example. This is not, again, proving this is not exclusive to Golovkin. There are many historians, myself included, that rank, say, well, if you go back to the Murderers Row, none of those guys won the legit world title in their time. Burley, Holman Williams, and the like, and yet we don't think any. We don't really have a second thought. If someone said to you, "Who's a greater middleweight, Charlie Burley or Tony Zale?" you would probably go with Charlie Burley, even though he didn't win the actual world title. But these are guys that are fighting 9, 10, 8, 9, 10 times a year against not just journeymen, but other top-notch contenders in a stronger era. And they're fighting from welterweight to middleweight and fighting guys that are bigger. The reason Burley gets ranked so highly on a pound-for-pound scale, again, we're going into top 10 of division here, let alone top 100 pound for pound. And Charlie Burley ranks high on most people's top 10 pound for pound. Is because he has a large body of work across these weights, not a decent but middling record at middleweight and then a couple of fights at super middleweight, light heavyweight. If Golovkin wants to take on I'll change my mind on him moving up in weight if he wants to take on Charlie Burley's schedule and fight once every 6 weeks against a huge range of opposition. And you've got to remember as well, Golovkin, if he moves up in weight, he's going to move up in weight. Charlie Burley was weighing 150 pounds, fighting guys like Oakland Billy Smith that were legit light heavyweights. Yeah. That's the difference. When you're ranking guys, people often say that guys are biased and historians are biased to older fighters. To me, it's all about criteria. And for me, I just can't ignore those kind of achievements. Like you said earlier, the bouts are materialistic at the end of the day. Achievement for me, I don't know, it just hits a certain part of my brain and I get kind of overawed by it. I just can't deny that sort of stuff. Golovkin, probably my favourite fighter active, if not Roman Gonzalez or Sergei Kovalev or Denis Lebedev. I've got quite a few actually, but
anyone in the cruiserweight division.
Oh, anyone in the cruiserweights, you know what I mean? Again, look, if we use those guys as an example, let's say Lebedev completely clears up the cruiserweights, yeah? Let's say he clears up the cruiserweights, he beats 5 of the top 10 that are currently there. He is without a doubt a top 3 cruiserweight of all time. Yeah. If Evander Holyfield had only done what he did at cruiserweight and continued there for quite a while and not moved to heavyweight, would anyone have Evander Holyfield in the top 100 of all time? Probably not. Because it's not a historically deep division like heavyweight. Do you know what I mean? Does that make any sense? But
I completely understand what you're saying, and I think it's really funny. You know, if you ask someone who are like the top 10 cruiserweights of all time, like that would be a really difficult question for someone to answer.
It's difficult for me to answer.
And it's like, look at the guys who you'd say like they're probably the best fighters who fought in the cruiserweight division, but like Holyfield, who you just mentioned, these are guys who like moved up in weight and sought glory in other divisions. So it's so hard to try and place who the best cruiserweights of all time are, and it's really hard to think like you and I and a couple of others out there really rate Lebedev. I see him get so much shit. People say he's like a crude banger when he's actually a very fucking good boxer, pardon my French, and a good counterpuncher.
Fuck it, you can swear, man. It's your fucking podcast, man. If you want to fucking swear, you can. Am I allowed to fucking swear or what?
I try and keep it a little bit toned down. Some people don't like it, but
I won't swear anymore. Then I've just literally hit my quota for the whole next 10 episodes we're going to do over the next couple of years. So apologies if I've offended anyone. Definitely don't follow me on Twitter if you're offended by that.
But yeah, I think it's funny to think that Lebedev, like you could argue that if Lebedev did that he would be one of the best in a division of all time, and so many people
definitely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head, because with cruiserweight, if you made a top 10 of cruiserweight, I mean they're all elite fighters, but cruiserweight I think is the one. If we're going back to what we said earlier about sort of bastard divisions, cruiserweight is the one where after like the top 3 or 4, and even after like just Holyfield, really, you're getting guys that if they were in any other division, you would not really consider them all-time greats.
Yeah. Because
the cruiserweight when it started was guys that were either like sort of a bit over the hill, or guys that are a bit too small. Realised a while ago they're a bit too small for heavyweight. And then as it's gone on, as I say, the very best, like you said, the best cruiserweights are usually known for going up in heavyweight. I mean, you've got like Johnny Nelson in the top 10. Now, I actually really like Johnny Nelson, not as a panelist so much. I assume you're not listening, Johnny, but you ain't good at your job, mate. But as a boxer, I love fiddly negative fighters anyway, as you know. I like all sorts of stylists. I can appreciate the fiddly sort of
Difficult.
negative kind
Yeah.
of difficult guys. Yeah, Johnny Nelson fought a lot of good fighters, and even though some of his decisions were a little bit sort of, thinking of the oh man, who's my man? My mind is so frazzled right now. Who's my man from Panama? Who's like one of my favourite fighters the last 10 years who got done for roids?
Uh,
Cruz, Guillermo Jones, yeah,
yeah.
Guillermo Jones, yeah. Really, Nelson didn't deserve any sort of half shake of the division and decision in that fight. But he's a guy who's got longevity. He's a guy who fought heavyweights. He fought a lot of good guys at cruiserweight. If he's in anyone sort of at least 6 to 10 of cruiserweight, would you say if a fighter had exactly the same career as Johnny Nelson in any other weight class, even like super middleweight, would he be top 10? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So, and this is a problem that all guys nowadays are having, because with the proliferation of titles and irregular fighting schedules, or rather regular fighting schedules, like 2, 3, 4 times a year if we're lucky, like Donaire and his peak, was he fighting? He fought 4 times a year that year. Even then, you haven't. If you middled it out over the years, there's not a lot of fights for you to fight good opposition in. Like Cal Brook, we're seeing it with Cal Brook now. I mean, let's just say Cal Brook was as talented as some people think he is. He would have to fight everyone over like the next 2 years to have a chance of facing a really like murderer's row at welterweight, so to speak, because he's wasted so much time with injuries and mandatories, and you could waste a whole year of your career in boxing nowadays. If you say you fight in December and you don't fight till the next November, that's a whole year of legacy building you've just lost. Gonzalez is doing things the right way. Golovkin's doing things the right way. Go back to your original question. Gonzalez has got the best chance, in my opinion, because I think there's not really any big money fights for the little guys, and Gonzalez is getting to the point where he's a money fight for the little guys. He's not a money fight anywhere else, but for the little guys, I mean, they can probably make more money fighting Gonzalez. Golovkin is not in that position because Canelo can go, do you know what? I'm going to move up and fight, I don't know, anyone at super middleweight, really, and make just as much, not just as much, but I can make enough money to make me happy that I'm not facing you. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think that's
Estrada has to fight Gonzalez.
Yeah.
And that Wrong has to fight Gonzalez. Inoue needs to fight Gonzalez.
That's a very good point. How with the money that Gonzalez brings to the table now for these little guys, and there's actually a very interesting statistic about last weekend's fights where Dominic Wade got $500,000 against Golovkin, and Gonzalez only got 300,000.
I didn't know that. That is perfect. Absolutely perfect. Brilliant.
A very big purse, though, for those guys in that division. Historically, that's a massive amount of money for these guys who are fighting at 112, 115 pounds. So people aren't going to have a reason to avoid him, and they're not going to want to avoid him. It's like Mayweather, how he was avoided at one point, or however you want to view that. That's how some people say it. But then he became the money guy, and everyone wanted to fight him. So you can use that in Gonzalez's example to really draw in those big names and get the money that's needed. The money's on the table, and you can get the names that you need to prove your greatness.
Exactly. I mean, look, and the options for Golovkin for Gonzalez is so much greater because he's had ties to the Taken gym for ages and the promoters in Japan, so he can move up and fight Inoue, or now you're Inu, as some people say. I'm still not sure about the pronunciation, which is crazy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Inoue.
I say Inu, but
Inu, yeah.
No idea.
I say Inu, but everyone else says Inoue, and it's kind of taking me out of it now. But anyway, yeah, now you're Inu, yeah. I mean, he can move up and fight him. Now, that's a big fight in itself, yeah. That's a discussion for another time. But let's say he beats him. If he wanted to, let's say, hypothetically, and Samuel Moreno gets injured. Yamanaka's already looking like he's well past his prime, much like God rest his soul, Uchiyama is now.
All right.
R.I.P. the legend. You know what I mean? Let's just say that Gonzalez goes, you know what? I'm already weighing like 126. Yamanaka probably weighs 130 in the ring. The Japanese don't cut a huge amount of weight from most of the time anyway, from what I can tell. Maybe moves up and fights him.
Yeah,
Now, to anyone on the outside looking in who isn't a really cynical historian, and we would give him credit for anyway, because 105 to 118 is actually quite a big jump, even taking into account that he weighs more in the ring. And even taking into account that Yamanaka has passed his prime, in years to come, and you look at Gonzalez and you see he ended his career as 50-0, and his last fight he beat a bantamweight titleist, even though he started at strawweight, and that bantamweight titleist was like undefeated for so long. That's the kind of thing that gets you up there. Even though we know that Yamanaka hasn't looked great for the past couple of fights, really, and he looks like he's sort of lost a killer instinct to an extent. And even though we know that Gonzalez probably dropped that belt rather than fight Marino because it's just no good, let's just say that then he fights Rigondeaux at 120. That's the kind of thing he needs to do. If you want to tell me, look, could Gonzalez get in the top 100? Yeah, he definitely could, even based on on the path he's treading. If you want to get him in the top 50, that's what he's got to do.
absolutely, yeah. And that's the thing, it's crazy to think that he's weighing the same in the ring as Rigondeaux is. I'm really glad that you brought Rigondeaux up, because I didn't want to be the one to do it, as everyone knows my affinity for him.
Oh, were you a fan of his? I never knew that. Are you a fan of his? You never made it clear to me. Do you know what I mean?
But yeah, that kind of thing for Gonzalez if I mean, can you imagine? Because these are all fights that are actually possible. Whether HBO is going to want them all or not is another question. But if he just fought some of the names that you mentioned, if he fought Estrada in a rematch, then Inu, then Yamanaka, then Rigondeaux, holy shit! Like that's.
Oh mate, if he beat all those guys and there was like 50-0, 51-0, 52-0, he would be allowed to be in the same discussion as like Mayweather and Pacquiao, wouldn't he? Let's be honest. If not, do you know what I mean? And people online now are going to be going crazy at me. I don't care. It's true. That is an incredible record, especially when you look at some of the guys he beat down in the lower weights that you do not know about. Like Yukata Nida was a champion for a long time, and yeah, strawweight is barren, but he was a good fighter. And contenders like Chango Vargas and guys like Valoria past their prime. These are still who's who of the lower weight classes. If you look at the past, and here's another thing that really does my head in, because people always say to me, "Oh, you always favour the older fighters." If you actually have someone else have a proper discussion with me, I can tell you, go tit for tat through the old fighters' record, especially down at flyweight, and I'd say exactly the same thing for those guys as I do now. Yeah, okay. Miguel Canto had a really great career, but do you know that he got made to look pretty average by a Muay Thai guy who had like 2 professional fights? Do you know what I mean? People don't know that. People don't care for that. And yeah, he probably did deserve the win in the rematch against Chan Hee Park. But did people remember that I give him Chan Hee Park so much credit for completely making Canto look foolish in their first fight? No, they don't. People just think that you overrate the old fighters and you look at them with rose-tinted glasses. It's not the case. It's even when you dissect them, even when you get to the rust patch underneath the sort of glossy paint on top, so to speak, there's still so much quality there that they're still rated higher. It's not a case of looking at guys with rose-tinted spectacles. And Gonzalez deserves the same treatment. When you look at a career once the dust has settled, and this is a hypothetical situation we're discussing here, because I don't like the rank fighters until the dust has settled in their career. Once you have a look, it's not black and white. Yeah, Vargas was only really a contender, and he gave Gonzalez hassle because, it was at altitude and what have you. And, you could say, oh, he wasn't very good because Alnica blasted him in like a round. But that you got to look at the whole picture. Vargas was a good contender. Good contenders are good parts of your record. It's not just how many bouts you win and who are the best pound-for-pound fighters you beat. It's about quality and quantity. It's quantity of quality, essentially, to sum it up.
Yeah, I completely agree. Let's move on from Gonzalez just now. We've done quite a lot of discussion into him. We've spoken about Golovkin and you. It's these guys like Ward and Rigondeaux, like great fighters. Like there's no denying their skill. And Ward, as you said, you can already argue him to be one of the top guys in his division. Rigondeaux, does he have that luxury? Do you think, being in the super bantamweight division with the history of it?
Do you know what, man? If he had beaten, like you say, even though I don't rate Quigg very much, but if he'd beat Quigg and Frampton with what he'd already done and the win over Donaire, who was a top pound for pound there and a really good fighter, and you know, Rigondeaux was not very inexperienced. I'll tell you what I just said about taking guys into consideration and not being too black and white about them. Rico Ramos was crap.
Shite.
So I'm not giving him any credit for that. But, you know, he's got other good wins there as well. I mean, Agbeko, no one gives him any credit for the King Kong win nowadays. Yeah, he was pretty... he seemed pretty uninterested, and he was pretty inactive going into that. But that's a solid win. Bantamweight, super bantamweight has historically been a super bantamweights beating good bantamweights, top 5 bantamweights is a thing that historically has happened, and there's nothing wrong with that. Do you know what I mean? But no, I don't think he has the same luxury.
And that's exactly the thing, is you can't really see anyone who he could fight that would be willing to fight him to get him the ability to be ranked that way.
Would I rank him higher than, say, Jeff Fenech? No, I wouldn't. You know what I mean? If you compare, if the internet was around today, people would probably rank Samat Payakaroon as highly as they did Donaire. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. You have to take into account as well that it's constantly under the microscope nowadays. And it's made it easier for people looking back as well, because you can get newspaper reports, you can access footage you never would have been able to access back in the day. And I think it's not to boxing's detriment. I think it's to its benefit, but it also allows us to see that, in my opinion, Rigondeaux is probably one of the most talented fighters I've ever seen. I don't know if you were on the forum at the time, but I used to freak out about him when he was an amateur. I know it's fashionable to say that nowadays, but I always did, and he was my sort of wet dream sort of thing to get into the pros. And to be honest with you, even I'm underwhelmed. You know, I can't help but be. I mean, I love the guy, but I think he's already past his prime. And me and you have argued about this in the past, about the chin thing. You know, you say, you know, his chin ain't that bad. He gets back down. Well, you know, when you're comparing to other guys around those sort of weights, I mean, Wilfredo Gomez got put down. You know, Wilfredo Gomez was put down at super bantamweight by a Korean with T-Rex arms. Yeah, but there's so much more from Gomez at that weight class for you to draw on. Do you know what I mean? He would not probably be knocked down by Amagasa. So, you know, and then he destroyed Carlos Zarate. You know, he beat one of the greatest Muay Thai fighters of all time in Sagat. He took on all these really good challenges at a super bantamweight, and then he come back down and beat Lupe Pinto when both were a bit past their prime, but Gomez even more so. And Rigondeaux, he hasn't got that body of work. It's a whole body of work. Jeff Fenech has the small body of work like Rigondeaux, but it's just a bit more consistent there. And he has a win about a pound over the limit against Daniel Zaragoza, who went on to be like the best super bantamweight of the next period after Fenech. That means a lot. Do you know what I mean? Rigo doesn't have that. He's a guy who, if he'd done it earlier, like we were saying earlier about pound for pound achievements, if he'd gone up in his sense, actually moving up weight would actually mean carry a bit more clout, because he's not cutting weight already. He's not a guy who's moving up to his natural weight. He actually would be taking on those Charlie Burley-esque weight disparity sort of matchups that I was talking about earlier. That would be impressive. But short of him sort of moving up, beating Salby, then moving up super featherweight and beating Lomachenko, he's not going to be a pound for pound great. He's going to have to survive on being probably a lower top 10 super bantamweight of all time, and arguably the greatest amateur of all time, which is nothing to be sniffed at. But if you'd asked me, you know, when he was an amateur, could he do more? My answer would have definitely been yes.
And it's a real tragedy to just look at his career. And I'll be honest with you, I don't see how he's going to get out of this hole. Like, I'm happy for him as a person because he's going to get paid well in this Rock Nation contract. But his career is pretty much done. Like, he's not going to get another big win. He's not going to get anything that nearly touches that Donaire win.
Unless Gonzalez moves up, my friend.
I just don't see HBO really being up for that. You know, Gonzalez is now their cash cow in the lower weight division, where they can really use that as a way to boost the kind of market that's going to attract some people that they probably pissed off in the past. You know, the hardcore fans who kind of like those.
Yeah.
The action fights in the lower weights are so good. You know, like it's. So I don't see them really risking Gonzalez, who they're building up to be this money guy, against a guy like Rigondeaux, who they hate. You know.
Andre Ward, who you were speaking about, yes. He can do it. He can do it because if he moves up and beats Kovalev, and then he beats some other good light heavyweights, and maybe he fights the likes of DeGale, Well, he can't fight De Gale because he's with Al Heyman. But, you know, that level of fighter, if he moves up to light heavyweight and he beats Kovalev and then he waits for the next, and maybe he, you know, let's say hypothetically, he could beat someone like Beterbiev or Igor Makontsev if he eventually shows anything near promise, which he isn't. There's a guy who was a good amateur who's doing nothing in the pros, by the way.
Yeah.
Ward can do it. But again, I mean, he moves up. It's the options that are actually available to him. Like Rigo, he's sort of, you know, he's signed with Rock Nation. Well, there's any Al Heyman fights gone.
Yeah,
You know
exactly.
what I mean?
It's
And, you know,
um, just with that, that's like we've kind of touched on a couple of things that I wanted to bring in as like possibly reasons why the view of what greatness is dying out as a thing today, as a concept. You know, we've mentioned all of the new weight divisions, which, you know, obviously they're not that new at this stage, but a lot of people who would be fighting in the middleweight division, if you think about all the great fighters who are like just below or just above there, how they could all be stacked into that division, like the quality, if we had less weight divisions, how that's declined, so these guys aren't all fighting each other. And what you just said there about what was it? Where were we?
promotional issues and TV deals and getting in the way.
Yeah, precisely that. So I think that there are some reasons that can be attributed. You know, like we're never going to see, like we'll have never seen Pacquiao fight and, you know, beat Thurman, Porter, Garcia. You know, all these guys who he could have fought and what that could have done to his resume. We're not going to see Stevenson versus Kovalev or Stevenson versus Ward. You know, neither of those guys are going to get a chance to kick Stevens' ass. You know, there's all of these things that I think really diminish the concept of what greatness is today.
I agree with you 100%, man. I mean, and like we said earlier, it's not. There's greater forces at work than the fighters. Sometimes it's not their fault, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to give them a free pass. Do you know what I mean? It's not their fault. I can only enjoy their careers as they're going on. I'm not going to give these guys an unfair shake in like a head-to-head matchup. I mean, the talent is there to see. If you're ranking guys based on pure talent, there are guys from this era that could probably be ranked, you know, in the top 100 alongside all these other great fighters that we've got on film, which is another thing which is strange because you see a lot of people say, oh, the old timers, you watch them on film and they're just not impressive. They are, unless you're going in for really blinkered. Again, you have to look at the whole picture. Smaller gloves, longer rounds, fighting the best, week in, week out. You know, all this stuff adds up to the style being used in the ring, and people are quite blinkered in that instance. I think a lot of people see it as an us versus them kind of thing. People like to think that the era they are in, their era, the fighters they're seeing, they're the good fighters. You know, we're getting it with Anthony Joshua now. You know, is there a heavyweight could handle Anthony Joshua in his prime? I said the same thing about George Foreman. You know what I mean? I said the same thing about Sonny Liston, and they said the same thing about Jim Jeffries. You know what I mean? This is not a new argument that's being
There's
said.
always been hype, yeah.
It's always been hype, and people like to think that their era is the best. But I honestly do believe that this era is a lesser one. I mean, if you compare it to the 90s, and the 90s looks like the 70s compared to this, the last sort of, you know, year 2000 onwards.
Yeah.
We've had some highlights. And I mean, there are fighters that are top 10s in their division, and there are fighters which are top 100 of all time. I mean, Floyd Mayweather, Bernard Hopkins. Bernard Hopkins has done most of his legacy defining work since the year 2000. Do you know what I mean?
No, he's like, if he had retired after his middleweight career when he was 40 years old, he wouldn't have been touching into an all-time great list.
But it'd be in a top 10 middleweight list.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly what these guys can do. It is achievable. I mean, let's say Uchiyama and it got destroyed last week and he'd gone on to beat the winner of Walters and Lomachenko, which we know now he wouldn't have done. But that, for me, he would have been a top 10 super featherweight of all time and strong in there. He would have been a nice linchpin in there. He probably would have been maybe 5 or 6. And super featherweight is not... actually, no, it would have been about 7 or 8. But super featherweight is not one of these bastard divisions that's only been around since the mid to late 80s. It is a division that has been there... forever, basically. It didn't have as much prominence back in the day, and sports writers, in the 20s and in the 30s, really didn't give it credit. But I mean, Flash Lorde brought prestige back to it, and in the 70s onwards, it's been a division. It's not a division that you can just jump like super middleweight, where pretty much every great super middleweight has been during, maybe not yours, you're not quite as old as me, but it's been during my lifetime. Do you know what I mean? I've seen all of them. You know,
Yeah.
And it's kind of weird to see, but you don't really feel so precious about it because you've seen it unfold in front of your eyes. But if you try to start telling someone that their favorite fighter isn't a top 10 lightweight, like Floyd Mayweather, Floyd Mayweather isn't a top 10 lightweight. Well, of course he is. Have you ever seen a better lightweight? Well, that's not the argument. The argument is not,
You don't rank
Floyd,
fighters in an all-time sense based on the eye test, you know.
no, but the eye test is important in terms of,
Of course, yeah,
hypothetical
but
matchups. Yeah, I'll give Mayweather credit. People think, oh, I hate Mayweather. I don't hate Mayweather. I hate his fans.
yeah, absolutely. It's the same as like Joshua.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. I mean, I love AJ and I supported him since he was an amateur. Now I can't stand the guy. Well done, AJ fans. Well done, Eddie Hearn bum lickers. You know what I mean? Bum sniffers. I hate a fighter that I've loved for years because of you. Thanks for spoiling the sport for me.
I'm trying to be less cynical in that regard because I just realized that
Yeah,
I'm never going to be a fan of any fighter like ever again. You know. So like
exactly.
when a new started, like Gonzalez started getting a lot of hype, and then people started being a little bit overkill with it, and like this was something that I brought up a little while ago. How people like to create strengths and weaknesses about their favorite fighters. And I'm going to hold my hands up and say that since we last spoke about Rigondeaux's chin, I've changed my mind and I admit, yeah, he's glass. You know, like he can't hold up to a very great
But he's
shot.
passed his, but he passed his best. He's passed his best, man.
Yeah.
It happens
But
to everyone.
let's not get too far into that though. But people like to create strengths and ignore weaknesses regarding their favorite fighter. You know, I was arguing with someone in the build-up to Arroyo versus Golovkin, where I said that Arroyo was the hardest puncher in the division, and people were making the case that no, like he doesn't punch a tenth of hard as Golovkin does. As Gonzalez does. He's this monstrous puncher with one punch knockout in each hand. And Gonzalez hits really hard, but let's not try and make it out like he's got that "I'll tap you on the chin and you'll fall asleep" kind of power.
No, he hasn't. No, he hasn't.
Yeah.
You're 100% correct.
Let's not say that he's got the best defense in the sport. Like some people I respect, you know. I'm not going to name any names, but someone who I respect a lot was saying that he thinks that Gonzalez has the best defense in the sport. He doesn't. Like he's good defensively, but he does get tagged cleanly. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
all of these things. Kovalev, people. I love Kovalev. You know, people give me shit and say that I hate him because I point out some weaknesses that I think he has. I don't think he holds up to a shot too well, and I think that he's actually a bit afraid of being hit.
Hey mate, you're 100% right, and so is Bob Foster. And Bob Foster's the top 10 light heavyweight of all time.
Exactly, that's the thing. There are no supermen in the sport, you know, and the sooner that people accept your favorite fighter has a weakness, the sooner you're going to enjoy it and be willing to accept it when something bad happens in their career.
I agree 100%. That's basically you've had to tell yourself that because you are gutted that one day someone with feather fist is going to spark Rigo out and you're going to be having your breakfast while it's happening and you're going to have a breakdown in you. But now you've prepared yourself. You know what I mean? I think I felt Uchiyama just got destroyed by the widest, sloppiest punches I've ever seen. It's absolutely crushed me. Or
we both knew that Uchiyama's been at that stage for a while where he could realistically lose to anyone, and like lose to a lower level guy, or still have the ability to beat a top level guy. I mean, we discussed it. He's been looking past his prime since he fought in 2013 against.
Yeah, so how bad do you think I felt when he destroyed Jomtong Chuatana in 2 rounds? And I was like, oh, gee, I was well past his best. My boy Jomtong's got this. And he flattens him in 2 rounds. And that's a guy who's never been knocked out in over 300 professional fights. And he's still a young guy. I mean,
Remember,
it's
boxing. I was sitting
boxing.
in Thailand during that fight, watching it in a bar with a bunch of Thai people who went crazy when they got knocked out.
Yeah, man, I think I probably would have just thrown myself into the river if that had happened, man. I mean, I saw Jomtong in Thailand, great fighter, do you know what I mean? I've seen him live, I've met the guy, great fighter, really nice kid, and he is a kid compared to me. But yeah, I mean, it's boxing, man. Everyone has weaknesses. I mean, that guy didn't even have any weaknesses in his chin. That's weaknesses in his defense and in his footwork. Do you know what I mean? It's like Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather's weakness is that he has a pretty low work rate at times. And people go, well, it doesn't hamper him in any fights. It's still a weakness because if he was doing what he did with a low work rate and he was doing it and I could see that he had no way of upping his work rate, it wouldn't be a weakness. The fact is, Floyd Mayweather at times could have thrown more punches and one thing. Exactly. Against someone like Julio Cesar Chavez in his prime, that would have been a weakness. Do you know what I mean? Or even someone like Maldrick Taylor who could spam punches at you. Do you know what I mean? That would be a weakness. Do I think Floyd Mayweather would have beat those guys? Yeah, he probably would have done, actually. I mean, Chavez would have been a hard one, but I think he would have beat Maldrick Taylor. I think he probably would have beat, He could be someone like Aaron Pryor, who's a work rate machine, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't a weakness. Do you know what I mean? What does it mean that it wasn't? Everybody has weaknesses. Manny Pacquiao has many weaknesses. The best fighters in the sport have weaknesses, and Gonzalez has weaknesses. I mean, Arroyo showed. I mean, Arroyo can bang. It wasn't the power that surprised me. It was the fact that Arroyo showed, even as a relatively one-handed fighter, the way Gonzalez stoops over, sometimes you can get under there. If someone's got a good uppercut and can use it and use their feet to stay away from him, then he is beatable. Everyone's beatable, even the best fighter in the sport, and that's what Gonzalez is. He's the best fighter in the sport.
I fully agree. Yeah. So we've covered that quite pretty well. I think just one last concept of a fighter before we move on from this. Of course, we've got the rematch of Tyson Fury and Vladimir Klitschko coming up soon. I believe that you rate Klitschko as a top 10 heavyweight, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think he's a top 10 heavyweight of all time. I think his early career and his career arc actually is comparable to. This is funny. I need to backtrack a little bit because you know what I was saying about rose tinted spectacles.
Yeah.
People do view the two Jacks, Jack Johnson and Jack Dempsey, with rose tinted spectacles.
And they're guys that you can't rank as all time greats, really.
They're guys that are all time greats. Again, they're all time greats in their division. Vladimir Klitschko, they have similar career arcs, those guys. There are guys that have a period of dominance after a shaky early start. And again, it's circumstantial. You know, Jack Johnson and Dempsey being a hobo, and Johnson, well, we all know the Jack Johnson story. It's a circumstantial thing, things they overcame.
Yeah.
Vladimir Klitschko certainly had it easier once his boxing career had started. He's a guy who overcame a physical deficiency, and that's crazy to think that he would have one. Because look at the guy, and has mastered a style. And for me, people say the heavyweights weren't all that great in the last 10 years, and that's true. For me, the biggest issue with Klitschko is that the best number two or the best number one, he never actually faced. He never got a chance to face his brother. The only time he really faced the number two was after that, was with David Hale or Povetkin,
Yeah.
And those aren't as good. Those number twos ain't as good as his brother was. You know what I mean? So he's not top five. He's not, Larry Holmes. I wouldn't even say he's Mike Tyson. Is another guy who gets underrated nowadays, where he was so overrated.
Crazy.
Larry Holmes. Yeah, Larry Holmes now gets overrated because he was so underrated. People have always said, "Oh, Larry's so underrated," and now Larry's a tad overrated. Maybe Lennox Lewis is slightly overrated, even by myself. But Vlad is underrated, criminally underrated, in my opinion. Long dominance, smashed pretty much everyone. I mean, the guy's one of the hardest punches in heavyweight history. And, I can see why people don't like him. For me, Klitschko is very similar stylistically to Carlos Monzon, because people say on Monzon that, especially when you get into boxing, you start looking at the greats. You look at Monzon, you go, what's the crack? This guy doesn't seem to be very good. And of course, he was unbelievable, but he's just not immediately impressive. To me, in maybe 10, 15 years' time, hopefully, people will find the same about Vladimir, that when you look into him a bit more, actually, whilst what he's doing is not necessarily aesthetically pleasing, it's all right.
Yeah. So the question that I've got with that is, obviously this is something that Klitschko has done in the past, where he's overcame a loss and came back to win. But if he, at 39 years old, or is he 40 yet? I think he's
40 now, isn't he? Or he's going to be 40, yeah.
If he beats Fury in this rematch, handedly, and shows that he can come back from a loss at this stage in his career to fight the best heavyweight in the world, who just easily beat him in the guy's hometown, what does that do for his career to you? Would a win over Fury in this rematch elevate him further?
No, it wouldn't. Because, I give guys like Larry Holmes credit for, when he's well past his prime and he takes on Ray Mercer and Larry's the opponent and he gets banjoed with a jab in the first round and he comes on the win. That's impressive. You know what I mean? There's a few heavyweights that have done stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? If you look at Joe Louis after the first Walcott fight, which a lot of people still say is a robbery to this day, but it wasn't. But it's certainly true that Joe didn't look very good in that fight, and then he decimates him in the rematch. Okay, Walcott's an older guy. He's an older guy. But he's a guy that is a world class fighter. with Fury, I mean, again, you have to take everything into consideration. I love Tyson Fury. I mean, actually, I was saying Golovkin's my favorite active fighter. Fury's one of them, as well. But if we looked at this in 10 years' time, let's say Klitschko comes out, destroys Fury in 2 rounds, like he done with Ray Austin, for example, or many other guys, we would say in the years to come, like everyone does, every historian does, well, you know, before the fight, Fury was already talking about retirement, and Fury was out of shape. He was in much better shape for the first fight, and blah, blah, blah. And you've got to take those things into account. I mean, it's certainly impressive, and it's the modern era. Would a 40-year-old man still be in as great physical shape as Vlad is after so many fights in, say, the 1940s? No. You know, take from that what you will. But I think anyone who isn't, you know, I think anyone who's even slightly cynical, you know, can see why certain fighters have got longevity nowadays, and it's not just because they don't fight as regularly.
I think we're going to touch on that in a little while. Let's not get too much into that at the moment.
Yeah, of course. But you know what I mean. You know what I'm saying. Hey, man, it would be a huge achievement, and hopefully, it might not elevate him in my eyes, but hopefully more people will come around to my way of thinking. And he's a guy who's always going to have his detractors. Whatever happens, he's just always going to have his detractors, just like people will always take Johnson and Dempsey on Bert Sugar's word and on face value. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
It's the way it's going to be.
Okay, so let's move on to the next topic point. We spent quite a while on that one. There's a question that I posed a while ago, just threw it out there on Twitter to see what kind of replies I would get, and I was really stunned by the lack of responses and the lack of in-depth responses. You know, so often we'll hear about the lost arts of boxing, you know, these things that the old school guys, they used to do this and that, but no one today does it. And, you know, people, when I ask them to try and explain what some of those arts are, some of these lost arts, they'll say things that are very vague terms, like the clinch is dead, feinting is dead, the jab is dead. But there are still fighters who do those things. What are the particular things, like what particular aspects is what makes them arts that are no longer seen today? That was terribly worded, but I hope you can get my point.
No, I understand. And I am also guilty of being quite general at times. A good friend of ours, Jeff Thomas, who's now a trainer in Blackpool, a former professional. He's a guy who's very much a student of the sport, and him and I talk technique regularly. I mean, as you know, the guy is red hot when it comes to training. The guy is very. I guarantee anybody listening who doesn't know Jeff, in a few years' time, you're going to know Jeff, because he's a guy who is going to be an excellent trainer, and not just because he's my friend, because, you know, I tell my mates, if they're shit, they're shit. And I'm friends with a lot of actual professional boxers in real life, do you know what I mean? And some of them, they ain't all that, do you know what I mean? Jeff was the first guy that will tell you that he never made the most of his talent as a fighter. He was essentially a journeyman, a really good one, actually. If you do watch his fights, he's a guy who
always gave you trouble.
Yeah, he always gave you trouble. He's a guy who always studied old-time fighters, and now it hasn't changed as a trainer. So I said to Jeff, you know, he goes, oh, what is it about the old fighters? I said, well, it's the feinting. And he said to me, just like you have, you know, it was a bit general. What do you mean? So I'd send them examples, and it's not just feinting with your left hand. It's the upper body feints, and it's what that leads to. And a great one I showed him, and he put it into practice. And Jeff doesn't like to give away too much of his technique, because obviously other trainers watch other trainers. But a very nice one was a technique I showed him, which he laid onto one of his fighters. His fighter won a regional amateur title with it, brutal first round KO. And then it was in the Blackpool newspaper a week later, specifically mentioned this technique, and that Jeff had been drilling it in training. I hope Jeff doesn't mind me speaking about this. Well, fuck it, I came up with it, so I can speak about it. and Jeff told me I came up with it because Jeff was so thankful. You know what I mean? He even tagged the fighter in it and said he should thank me. And it's not me being arrogant. Look, I'm not a fighter by any means. I've trained with fighters, you know, here and abroad. And there's a guy from my street I've grown up with who is a professional. One of my good mates from school is a professional fighter. A couple of my mates are white collar boxers. You know, I've grown up with it. A little lad down my road that I interviewed when he was an amateur, signed with Frank Warren last night. Do you know what I mean? There's actually quite a lot. It's quite a community around here. And as I'm sure you can imagine, they know me and they ask me questions. You know what I mean? Because, you know, I'm the the anorak of the group. You know what I mean? I'm the anorak of the area, so to speak. And
Sure.
it's quite a small community. So, you know, I know fighters. I'm not a fighter myself. I feel I've got a pretty good eye for it. I wouldn't be an amazing trainer. Jeff Thomas, who we were speaking about, gives me a lot of credit for it, and he asked my input. And this technique was a technique by Johnny Bratton. And Johnny Bratton, what he'd do is he would feint a jab, and it's not a feint like a half jab, you know, like a half a jab and then you throw a jab, you know, like the classic double jab.
Mm-hmm.
It's a jab where he allowed his man to think that was his jab. So then his opponent would gain confidence. And when we think of a feint, we think of someone maybe, for a modern example, to I'm watching the Pacquiao one, where he drops down as if he was going to throw a right hand to the body, and then he brings the left hand straight across. He used it a lot against De La Hoya. You know which one I'm talking about, yeah?
Precisely what you're talking about.
Exactly, yeah. And anyone will. It's one of Pacquiao's go-to shots, especially against bigger guys like Margarito and De La Hoya, because, you know, he just completely comes underneath their line of vision. It's not like that. Basically, it's a fake. It's a fake more than a feint. It's a fake. And when Johnny Bratton's guy starts jabbing with him, he allows him to think he can, and he persists with this lazy jab, and then he'll drop on the inside of their jab. His head will go inside their jab. If you can think, anyone listening at home, it's two orthodox fighters. So the jab comes across, and his head slips inside their jab, and his overhand right comes over their jab and hits him around the back of the ear, yeah, or around the back of the head. He's perfectly got that guy in a triangle, essentially. He's lured his man into a place where he has nowhere to go. And Jeff loved this technique, and because Jeff's quite, you know, he's quite cheeky. He said to me, "Why'd you like it?" And I explained to him why, and I explained to him, "Look, this is what I think he's doing in this technique." And Jeff just said to me, "Bingo." And then a week later, he trained. That night, I think, or the next training session, he was training it to one of his guys who had a fight coming up. He showed me the footage. This guy used the technique, blasted this guy in the first round, and Jeff said to me, "He's not even a banger. He's not even a banger. He's just destroyed this guy in the first round." So that's just a little bit of a conversation we're having. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great example. That's fantastic. I love that kind of thing. Very in depth. Great explaining. Yeah, feinting is one.
It's just one example, though, Aaron. It's just one example.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, there are plenty.
Like different things that are just not seen today. One that I was going to bring up, it's just certain things that you don't really see happen on the inside anymore. Just the manipulation of your opponent's body, you know, like pulling someone's arm down so that you can land another shot, moving someone's head to the side to find place for your uppercut, even like pushing like your knee against like their hip, like pushing like your leg into get them off balance to set up other shots like that. Those are things that you really don't see too much anymore, but there are still some fighters that you see them pull it out. And it
Lomachenko.
Lomachenko does some shit that's
glove punching. He does glove punching. I love glove punching.
So some of the stuff that you see Lomachenko do isn't even old school. It's like new school. Like
he's a cyborg, man. The kid's he's a Ukrainian cyborg.
Yeah, he's insanely good. Like he just does some unbelievable shit. But you know, it's like you'll see some fighters who even aren't that good, but they'll do things that are like really old school techniques, like I was just talking about with the body manipulation on the inside, and that can be enough to sort of carry them. Adrian Broner, right? The man everyone loves to hate, and he's an asshole, and he's not a very good fighter. He fights second by second. It doesn't have any game plan. There are numerous flaws, but he is very, very good at manipulating where your body is on the inside, and I think that's what carried him through a very large part of his career. That's how he managed to beat guys up who were a lot smaller than him. That's how he destroyed DeMarco. Like, if you look at what he's doing on the inside, the way that he'll move your body, I think that is pretty much the only strength that he had, and that's what got him to this stage in his career.
I'll tell you what, you know, I was at upper body feints a minute ago.
Yeah.
There's a perfect example about this. Remember this prospect that everyone's forgotten about called Tony Harrison? And no, I don't mean the ball bag from the Mighty Boosh. The American guy, Tony Harrison?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
My good friend Conor Rebush, you know, he's a really good analyst for Bloody Elbow and Bad Left Hook. Everyone hates his scorecards, but no one disagrees with his analysis stylistically. He turned me on to a fight. I'd watched Tony Harrison, then he had a fight against a nobody, and I thought, well, I'm not going to bother watching that. And he hit me up and said, "My man, you've got to watch this fight. Tony Harrison, who's obviously like a junior middleweight or a middleweight. Is he a junior middleweight? I think he's a junior middleweight.
Did he not get stopped recently?
He did. But this was before that. And this tells you that he was going to get stopped. He fought this guy called the Gravedigger. It was this Mexican, like, he was like a lightweight. He was just out of shape. He was a fat, out of shape lightweight, yeah? Anybody at home, watch that fight. Just what you were saying just then. Fighters ain't that good that fiddle the way through with old school techniques. This guy is using upper body feints. I think he's like a Mexican, or he's at least Mexican schooled. He's using these upper body feints in a way that he's a journeyman. He's out of shape. He's naturally smaller. Boxing is not his full-time job. He's a gravedigger, and he's fighting a young, naturally larger, touted prospect. I think he gets stopped in the second round, but he shouldn't have been stopped. But just see how he's getting closer to him. See how he's making it difficult for him. See how he's getting his shots off. He's winning, really. I mean, if let's say the referee actually likes him, and it's supposed to be a 50-50 fight, and he's getting hurt and he's getting knocked about. If he comes through it, who's to say that, you know, he would have held his own? And this is a guy who isn't that good. Now you lay on these techniques to the top fighters today, and that's why, hey, Golovkin and Kovalev, they use them. They're both shift. Yeah. They both use the infamous Fitzsimmons shift. Now, if you look back at the old days of glove boxing, it is archaic, but it doesn't mean that they didn't know what they were doing. And the Fitzsimmons shift and the Ketchel shift, he often used a double shift. You know, he come in and then come back and then he shift within a shift sort of thing. Those techniques work. Like Jack Johnson's clinch game, that wouldn't work because they don't allow fighters to clinch as much nowadays. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, unless you're like Andre Ward or whatever, or Hopkins. But again, you can see echoes of Johnson in their style. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, you're right. I mean, the Fitzsimmons shift, I showed Jeff that as well, and oh man, he loved it. He said, Jeff, who was such a shrewd analyst, said it's basically a technique for which there is no defense against. Yeah. Because you're leading your opponent down a garden path, and when they get to the end, they realise it's a dead end. And when they turn around, you're waiting there in front of them. You know what I mean? That's what the Fitzsimmons shift is like. It's like, oh look, he's just missed 2 punches. He's fallen short of his jab, and his right hand has whizzed completely past me. I'm just going to step off to my left here. Oh no, he's turned back in with the left hand. Do you know what I mean? You don't expect fighters to cross their feet and stuff. Yeah. So exactly. You can get away with it. They tell you never cross your feet, never stand square on even for a second. Don't, unless you know that you're doing it and what's going to come afterwards. The Fitzsimmons shift is, again, a technique from the early days of glove boxing, which works today. We saw Kovalev use it against Pascal in the first fight to devastating effect. Yeah. So the old school techniques, again, don't look at things with rose-tinted spectacles. Look at it, take it apart, see which parts still work today, and then bolt it on to, you know, the newer models, so to speak. And I think, you know, you could take a lot away from the old school styles. As you know, I take so much more pleasure in watching the older fights. I do have a theory actually that it might be due to celluloid, and celluloid just being more pleasing to the eye than the digital technology. Just as vinyl sounds nicer than an MP3. You know, I don't consider myself easily fooled. That's a discussion for another time. But I don't consider myself easily fooled. But, you know, I do take that into account. I have analysed it a lot. And I think that might be also something to take away from that. But the old school fights, I mean, you see guys, and even like when you see like journeymen in there, they're often, they seem pretty shrewd. And you think, this guy who never even won a title back in those days, or was only a ranked contender for a short amount of time, would piss it today. Do you know what I mean? He might not be Floyd Mayweather, but there's 4 bouts around, he'd probably win one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got to say, that's probably the best answers that I've had to this question yet. I mean, I've posed this question to some like really respected members of the boxing community, and they've never really been that in depth. So thank you for those answers, mate. That's perfect.
Thanks for asking, man, and thanks to anyone who's listening to me rambling on. You know what I'm like. Imagine what I was like when I still smoked weed, man. You'd have been here till tomorrow.
Mate, the crowd's mostly appreciating you, but Boxing Analyst is formally asking that you apologise for the hate towards Carlos Monzon.
Yeah, all right. Let me jump on my phone, mate. I'm only having a conversation. Where is he? Is he on the forum or is he on Twitter?
Twitter.
Analyst.
We can deal with that later.
Yeah, all right. I'm just saying, you know, he's known me long enough. He's probably had this discussion with me already. Do you know what I mean?
All right. I've only got 1 or 2 more discussion points, really, that we can just fire through. Pound for pound lists, you know, a while back, like some people know this and a lot of people won't, but you and I, and, you know, Lester and some other guys in the forum helped contribute. But when we were running that top 30 pound for pound list, that's just something that you don't really see. Like, I mean, I don't exactly know how to phrase this. Pound for pound lists in general are done horribly, like absolutely shockingly. I saw one the other week that I posted on Twitter that had Wilder and Joshua top 10.
What's wrong with that? That's a good list.
Flawless list.
I think that was my list.
You know, I don't exactly know where I want to go with this pound for pound discussion, but it's something that there's such a depth of, and it fits in with the topic of modern greatness as we're discussing. You know, who are the greatest fighters today? I think that we need to start up a list, man.
We probably do, but do you remember how long it took? I mean, that was a lot of sort of protracted discussion and debate, and a lot of people getting involved, and it's not easy. The way we did it, which is very much we kind of approached it like Matt McGrain and I and other people, because I say I take credit for Chang, but if you go back on that thread, I mean, you've read Matt McGrain's top 100 pound for pound. If you go to the actual thread, which is still on the East Side forum,
I actually read it, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that went on for a long time, and there was a lot of debate about other fighters. And I actually got Young Corbett 3 up there as well. I mean, what a hipster I am! What a pretentious hipster I am! I listen to vinyl and I like Young Corbett the third. You know what I mean? It says it all, really. But we approached that very much the same way. Our pound for pound list and your pound for pound list, and the input I gave you on it, and others did. We debated win for win, place for place, fighter for fighter, and you kind of realise how arbitrary the Rings pound for pound and other pound for pound lists are. Do you see the one that Dan Vano shared over the weekend, where that guy had like Danny Garcia number 4, and who else did he have? It was just abysmal. It was abysmal. I think he might have had one of the Charlos in the top 10. I might be wrong, actually. I might have just made that up. But it's difficult to do, isn't it? I think you'd have to do it on like a monthly basis. You'd have to do it. It's difficult, isn't it? It is very in depth, and it takes a lot of thought for something which is essentially meaningless.
I think a lot of people really give hate to pound for pound lists, but I do actually think that they have their place in the sport. I think that it's important to know who the best fighters are, regardless of like division. Because I mean, obviously, it's something that can be argued over, but there needs to be like some actual respectable viewpoint that shows it. Like, but there's just so many ways that you can't really do it because it's such a subjective thing that a lot of people aren't willing to put that thought into it. Like, something that I had an idea like to do like a pound for pound list in the same style as like the transnational boxing rankings. You've got like a panel of people who all vote who they believe should be there, and compile it and see who the best thing is. But then you see other websites doing that, and it's still absolute shite because people can't get past their bias.
Yeah, true. And also, you've got to remember, there's still a whole wave of people that rank pound for pound in the old sense, which is if they were the same size, who would win, which is so spurious, which is such a spurious kind of line of debate. It's of no use to anyone. So what? So Vladimir Klitschko's a flyweight. So what is he, like a 5'8" flyweight now then? Because he's so big for heavyweight. He's not going to be the same size. It makes no sense. You have to rank it based on what have they done in their respective divisions versus what have they done in their respective divisions or over a few divisions. Do you know what I mean? It has to be, for their weight. What have they done at their weight? How good is their weight class? That's basically how you do it nowadays. You know what I mean? The old school way of if they were the same size is just it makes no sense. It makes no sense.
Completely nonsense. I just think that there's such a depth of quality in that discussion. But we can talk about that off air. I think that's something that we should start up again at some point. The last thing that I really want to go off into, and this is completely on a tangent to everything else that we've spoken about, but I know, for those who don't know, Kyle has been doing some investigative work into drug testing in the sport. You've mentioned to me how you just didn't really manage to get very far with that because it's so impossible to find out information from the people in the agencies. Do you want to speak on that for a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I was very interested in it, and I got into. I have talked to these agencies, and I've been given permission to send my questions. Some you get very sort of, should we say, No, like you ring a, you know, like when you ring, if you say you worked at a call line, we've all seen it in TV or in films, and they give you a script, and let's say you ask a question, they give you an answer, and then to the answer you give them, there's a series of questions that the other person might ask that also have an answer to them. It
Yeah,
came across quite scripted. I mean, I'd give them questions, and I'd try and be as specific as possible, and I'd go back with it, they come back with an answer, then I'd ask a question about that one, and I wouldn't get very far. Some were kind of very standoffish in a kind of sense of we cannot, tell you anything about this, and or oh, if I wanted a list of all the fighters that have been drug tested in the last year, how could I get it? It'd be very much, oh well, all I can say is that we are at the forefront of drug testing, bloody bloody blah. You know what I mean? I don't need to spiel. I don't want a sales pitch. Basically, Aaron, what I was trying to do was I was trying to get a list of fighters over a certain amount of time. I was hoping for maybe 18 months, a list of fighters that have been drug tested. See who was on there, who wasn't on there, how often fighters were drug tested, how close to, and match it up to their records, what the findings were. I was told that they wouldn't be able to produce that. Would I be able to speak to Robert Smith? I tried to get in contact with BBBOC and I didn't get I don't think I even got a response. Yeah, I wanted to interview some fighters about it as well. I have spoken to some fighters about it. Obviously, I covered the sport of Muay Thai as well out in Thailand, and I have information about it out there. And I write for an MMA site, and we are in contact with fighters. And a lot of my guys are investigative reporters, have busted guys and found out about stuff like that. And it's very interesting to see where boxing's at. Boxing's not my main sport, but as you know, I'm mainly known for boxing, and drug testing in boxing is such a huge thing right now, and it's still
yeah.
so. We're always told that progress is being made, and yet we're only finding hardly any fighters are getting busted, and when they are, it's always allowed to be swept under the carpet.
But
I mean,
in saying that, in the past fortnight, we've had Evenji Gradovic, Francisco Vargas, and Felix Sturm all get busted. Earlier this year, we got Lucas Brown busted. Of course, Kid Galahad just came back from his suspension, but I don't care to talk on that. So I think that there's probably a marked increase as of late with fighters
yeah,
being
but,
caught.
what's the punishment? I mean, these guys are, unfortunately, public opinion seems to be to take these guys for their word. Much like there's a certain heavyweight contender that was busted a few years back, and everybody pretty much, I would say 90%, pretty arbitrary percentage, by the way, but for argument's sake, 90% of people online say it's not his fault, he didn't know it was in the drink that he was drinking. Sorry, man, but just like I can't give fighters credit for not fighting fighters that didn't fight. I'm not going to give someone a free pass for not reading the ingredients. I'm not having a list of things they should be using, or the fact is, it's in your system. It's in your system. That what we always hear as well is when someone gets busted. Oh wow, his opponent was probably on it, or blah blah blah. Well, they weren't caught. This guy was, and I want to see it go through the correct channels. I mean, the example we just used about Vargas, he has, in my opinion, barely even been punished, and it doesn't look like he's going to be. I'm sure there'll be a finding afterwards, but we know he's got drugs in his system, and again, it's clenbuterol. Oh well, it's a weight kind of thing. It's not like, look, let's talk turkey. Clenbuterol is, is it just a weight loss thing? Often guys say it's just for losing weight. We all know that diuretics and what have you, and fat burners or what have you, could be used for other purposes as well.
Yeah.
Masking, or that sort of stuff. And for Lucas Brown's the one that really does my head in, because everyone speaks on Twitter and thinks he's a nice guy, probably because he speaks English as well. It probably makes it easier to have an affinity with the guy, and because he impressed everyone so much with his kind of the fairy tale. It was a fairy tale, wasn't it? And the fight itself was a fairy tale ending. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just the public support of the guy kind of makes me a bit pissed off. Like, it annoys me. It might well be that the guy's innocent, but don't immediately jump to his defence. And I find that his excuses seemed fairly piffy. I don't want to take it on a case by case basis at the moment. I wanted to take it on a case by case basis with my analysis. And to be honest, it's pretty much fallen out of bed now. I have learned some interesting stuff though, and I think it's a really interesting subject. I mean, the big story I think of modern boxing is not the titles, is not the fights not happening. I think it's probably the drug testing. I mean, if you look in cycling, it's certainly the biggest thing of cycling in the last era has been drug taking and drug testing. And I think at the top end of boxing is probably a little bit more money in it, and it's a little bit more tight knit, so it isn't really coming out in the way it did with cycling. But I think it'd be an even bigger shitstorm for the sheer fact that, okay, in cycling, the guys are pushing themselves to the limit, and if they're taking drugs, they could get an advantage, and they can also push their body to a place that it isn't supposed to be, like it did in the 60s, taking speed and dying because their bodies couldn't keep up with them.
Dead in the middle of the Tour de France.
Just dropping dead. In boxing, it's not you, it's your opponent. You could potentially damage your opponent, or you could potentially damage your kidneys with steroid use or diuretics, or even weight cutting in general, which is a big story again. And yeah, I think the shitstorm would be so big if it was over a wide scale. As I say, for example, the biggest money earner of the last 10 years and the most popular heavyweight now, English heavyweight now, and the biggest American and worldwide money maker of the last 10 years, and his most famous opponent were all three of them, let's just say, they were all found out. I'm not accusing, I'm just saying hypothetically, they're all found out as being HGH, TRT, whatever the main substance is, all of them, who cares, blood doping, the rest. All these three guys were found out as being drug cheats for years. It would ruin everyone's perception of the last era, and it would ruin the future of boxing as well. I think, unlike cycling, it'd be really hard not only just to regulate it, but to recover from it for boxing. Yeah, I really do think it would be difficult. And that's probably why there's a lot of money in boxing. I mean, we saw the Lance Armstrong shitstorm. You know what I mean? It was abysmal. It was abysmal for my dad, who had a US Postal Service Trek. And loved Lance Armstrong, you know what I mean? It was pretty brutal for him and many middle-aged men who saw him as a kind of role model. Do you know what I mean? To get away from Armstrong and go to Contador, who won the Tour de France, and he got done for the contaminated meat, which is the excuse we're hearing in boxing now, with the clenbuterol and stuff. And you think, well, cycling fans don't give Contador a free pass. You know, he's seen as a cheat, and everyone still jokes about it now. But in boxing, because they're putting their lives on the line, I don't know, we're a fickle bunch, boxing fans. We'll take the piss out of boxers and we're ripping the shit for not having the fights that we want to see them have. But if they take drugs, well, it probably wasn't his fault. I don't know about you, man, but does that not seem just preposterous?
I think it's disgusting, and the response that's happening just now to Kid Galahad having his comeback fight is just really pissing me off.
Well, someone showed a very nice piece of hypocrisy from one fighter who shall remain unnamed. There's an award named after him on another podcast, which I've been a guest on, who said that all drug cheats should be banned, and welcome Kid Galahad back and wish him well. Again, I guess if they're from your own country and you're one of those British boxing types, it's okay. But if it's one of your opponents or someone that could, someone that's better than you, it's not okay. You know
it's also Johnny Nelson had the same thing happen, where he said something about once a cheat, always a cheat in regards to Guillermo Jones, and then said, welcome back, Kid Galahad. And then, of course, you can just look at the physique that Johnny Nelson had in his past, but that could get me into libel territory.
No, but Johnny, for a better example, which won't get any libel, Johnny Nelson said that he saw Axel Schultz using steroids before the George Foreman fight. Nelson was the guy who broke the story that when he was a sparring partner for Schultz, he saw him injecting like anabolics. So yeah, Johnny Nelson's got plenty of history of accusing other people and saying how despicable it is.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Kid Galahad's all right because he's an Ingle boy. Oh no, it wasn't his fault because his brother spiked him. Remember?
Bullshit. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not libel either. I'm just saying, Barry, we're on your team. We're on your side, man. We know your brother spiked you. But it's a ridiculous situation, man. But as I say, it's a double-edged sword because if we did expose it, would we suddenly find that the fighters that weren't that good would suddenly become like amazing? Would it cause a complete rethink? Would all these fighters suddenly move up in weight because they won't be able to cut as much weight? Would they move down in weight because they couldn't put the muscle on? I mean, if you look at Vitor Belfort in MMA, I mean, you like a bit of MMA, right? You know who Vitor Belfort is, yeah,
Yeah,
right?
he's one of the
This is a
few.
guy, absolute muscle man since he was 18 years old. He gets busted time and time again. Everyone's suspicious of him. He finally comes back, and he's got nowhere to hide. There's suspicion amongst fans, not by me, because again, I'm not being libelous. There's suspicion amongst fans that he's probably still using, and then he turns up looking like a shadow, essentially, for the biggest fight he's had in years against Chris Weidman, who's the champion at the time, and gets decimated inside a round. He looks like a shadow of a man. He's gone from a guy who's muscled to hell, sparking people with spinning back kicks and high kicks, to throwing a combination, getting very tired very quickly, getting dragged down with seemingly no resistance mounted and pounded into oblivion within a couple of minutes. You know what I mean? Like, he's gone from Superman to a guy that once they started regulating him, even if he was able to still take stuff without his usual sort of lack of transparency, shall we say,
Yeah,
was
of course.
was a nobody. And would we see that in boxing? I don't know, but personally, from what I've seen, for the walls and the barriers that get put up when you try and ask these kind of things, even with reputable backing, you know what I mean? I'm not just a random guy knocking on doors. You know what I mean? I write for a site that is affiliated with one of the largest sports blogging sites in the world. I say sports blogs, obviously it stands SB Nation. It's a huge sort of site owned by Vox Media. Vox is well known for investigative journalism on politics and a number of other things. Yeah, I'm not a Pulitzer Prize winner, but I'm coming in with a bit of credentials. I'm a published writer. I've written for magazines, and you know, I'm not just a nobody. I'm not a somebody, but I'm not a nobody. And the balls get put up. You know, the balls get put up. People are protected to an extent, I think, and I think that's probably because of the money that would fall out of the sport if certain things come to light. I mean, you can lose a Kid Galahad or a Lucas Brown or even a Francisco Vargas, but you can't lose a really big hitter. I mean, look at Roy Jones. He got
Yeah,
away with it because, you know,
whipped
well,
under
his
the rug.
opponent was.
Yeah,
If that happened in the internet era as we know now, he might not have gotten away with it as much.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I think a
It's
lot of
the fact that you
people.
can now, like, you can show somebody the fucking photograph of the letter that says that he tested positive for anabolic steroids and his testosterone was X amount high over,
And
and
people can talk about it
people can
immediately.
still say that it was just rip fuel or whatever else. You know,
Yeah.
people can still just try and brush it under the rug and claim that it never happened. It's ludicrous. You know, and that goes back to like defending your favorite fighter regardless of something. You know, let's take a look at like I'm gonna wrap up soon, but I agree 100% with what you're saying. You know, that situation with Mayweather and his IV was kind of suspicious. You know, it was a fairly shady thing that happened.
Yeah. He
And
doesn't
then,
cut any weight, does he? He doesn't cut any weight. All his fans tell us, well, he's so special because he's fighting guys so much bigger than him. He doesn't cut any weight. Why
yeah,
isn't he eating an IV? Well, he's just getting some vitamins in him. Oh, hold on, man. Doesn't cut any weight. He
then
shouldn't
that
be
just
too.
gets swept under the rug because the chairman of VADA or whatever it was, you know.
USADA.
Yeah, sorry, the chairman of USADA comes out and says, "Nah, it was sound, lads, it was sound." So it's like, okay,
Yeah.
cool.
30 days after he did it, we said it was sound. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it's basically like, you know, it's like drugs in boxing and as sport as a general it's just a hole that has been dug so deep, and there's so much money on the line that if one of these things breaks, like, you know, if an Anthony Joshua, this is all hypothetical, you know, if Joshua, Pacquiao, Mayweather, one of these guys tested positive, you know, it would bring down,
The economy,
yeah, like
the boxing economy.
there's so much money involved now that they simply can't just expose these guys. And I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, the heads of all these drug companies, like the drug testing agencies, know who's on it at the top level and just, you know, doctor it.
Aaron, I won't be surprised if all the heads of these guys at the drug testing agencies are the guys that are supplying it personally. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got Victor Conti, who, you know, blocked me on Twitter. He probably won't even see this, who's so-called analyst. I'm not accusing him. I'm just saying, you know, if guys that used to do it could get involved in the regulation of it, then what's to say that it couldn't go the other way? if I knew that the drug testing was getting to a certain point and that certain drugs are about to come outlawed, and I knew there were drugs out there that were not detectable, and there was a certain amount of money on the table, what's to say that I wouldn't say, well, you know what, if your guy needs to be juiced up for the next fight, go for this rather than this.
Yeah.
By the way, we're going to randomly test you, and you've got to tell us where you are at any given time, and what have you. What's to say that, you know, they haven't told them, by the way, you need to be here at this certain time next week, and that's when I'll come and see you. Okay, thank you very much. I'll stop cycling on Friday. Do you know what I mean? I'll start cycling it off on Friday. I mean, again, all hypothetical. This is boxing. This is sport. This is so much money in this stuff. We've just seen Rafael Nadal say he's going to sue someone who accused him of steroid use. Lance Armstrong done exactly the same thing, and guess what, Aaron? He had to pay all that money back.
Yeah.
I think Marion Jones called for better testing back in the day as well. So, you know, often find the people who make the most noise have got something to hide. You know what I mean?
Well, that's the thing, you know, like Lucas Brown and Vargas both requested the additional testing in this and then failed. Lamont Pierce requested additional testing against Khan. Andrew Berto requested additional testing against Ortiz when they were first meant to have their rematch years ago. And those were all guys that got busted.
There you go. Hey, I hate the phrase "there's no smoke without fire," but often the guy who's got to lighten the kindle or what have you is you know what I mean? He's often the guy who's trying to mask the smell of something else, shall we say? Because if it makes a lot of noise, and look at Mayweather. Everyone sees Mayweather as some big champion for anti-drug testing and what have you, and he does Olympic-style drug testing. We all know that he was tested at 6-to-1 ratio and not a 4-to-1 TE. You know, so it's kind of a way of manipulation and then almost marketing in a way. You know what I mean? It's always market. Look, guys, I'm doing Olympic-style drug testing, and it's not quite Olympic-style drug testing. And obviously, Nonito Donaire was praised for being the first guy to be on VADA testing, and immediately sort of dropped off in quality and sort of hasn't been as good ever since. There's a big joke in MMA at the moment. In the MMA, obviously, I write for Bloody Elbow as well, and everyone makes these jokes now about post USADA or post VADA, or you know, because now they're doing a lot more drug testing in MMA. Fighters that seemed like Supermen before, like Vita Belfort that I was speaking about, and other guys, have seemingly dropped off. So there's a joke about it in a moment. It's not just exclusive to boxing. You do, and maybe it is getting better, but it's still not. It's not perfect. And hey, that's why I like the old school fighters. I like watching fighters from a time where steroids weren't even invented. I like watching fighters where, you know, I can't really say to a guy, that's not fair. He's had a scotch in between rounds, because it doesn't really help you. It doesn't really help you. Do you know what I mean?
I agree, yeah. You know, this has been brilliant, Matt. I think we should wrap it up here, but this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining. To everybody listening, please come join in the conversation on Check Quick Boxing. Where we can continue having this conversation. You'll see both me and Kyle posting there on occasion. Thank you very much, and see you all next week.
Thanks for having me, man.
Brilliant, mate. Cheers.
Did you enjoy that?
I'm just stopping the broadcast now.